The sound was not a slap. It was a crack, a thunderclap of finality that echoed in the stunned silence of their suburban Columbus, Ohio living room. The sting on her cheek a burning brand of shame that eclipsed the earlier humiliation of her high school graduation party, where her father, Richard Walker, a stern, disciplined man who wore his own 4 years in the army, like an unassailable crown, had decided to make a toast that turned into a public execution of her dreams, his voice heavy with disappointment and cheap beer, as he addressed their relatives and neighbors. "To my son, Jason," he boomed, clapping her brother on the back, headed to West Point, continuing a tradition of real service, real men. And then his cold blue eyes fell on her, on Lily, in her simple blue dress, her acceptance letter to the University of Chicago, for political science trembling in her hand. "And to Lily," he said, the pause dripping with contempt. "Who thinks reading books is a career, who wants to study the world instead of serving it. Let me be clear, you will never wear a uniform. You will never understand sacrifice. You will never amount to anything that requires real spine. You're a scribbler, a talker, and this country is built by doers." And the room had frozen, her mother, Eleanor, looking down at her hands, her brother Jason shifting uncomfortably but saying nothing. And Lily, her heart a trapped bird, had whispered, "Dad, that's not fair, I want to serve too. Just differently." And that's when he crossed the room, the smell of his aftershave and anger filling her space. And he did it, his open hand connecting with her cheek with a force that snapped her head to the side, not to injure, but to obliterate, to silence. "Don't you talk back to me about service," he hissed, the violence in the air now a tangible, suffocating thing. "You don't have the grit, the discipline. You're a dreamer and dreamers are a burden. Get out of my sight." And she stood there, the tears not falling but boiling behind her eyes, the physical pain nothing compared to the seismic rupture of a father's love being so violently revoked. The applause for Jason now a distant, mocking roar, and she turned, the imprint of his hand afire on her skin, and she walked out of the living room, out of the house, past the neatly trimmed lawn and the American flag fluttering by the porch, into the humid Ohio night, her graduation gown still in a box upstairs, her future suddenly a vast, terrifying blank. And she knew in that moment, with a clarity that was colder than any anger, that she would never come back to this house, not as this broken girl. And she got into her beat-up Honda Civic, her hands shaking so violently, she could barely fit the key in the ignition. And she drove west into the deepening darkness, the map of America unfurling before her not as a promise, but as an exile, and she whispered through the tears that finally broke free, a vow to the empty highway. "One day, you will salute me, and you will do it with pride, or you will do it because you have to, but you will salute me." The America that received her was a brutal lesson in scale and indifference. Her first stop was Chicago, the city of broad shoulders that shrugged at her pain, where her dorm room at the university felt like a lonely cell, the political science books that had once promised understanding now seeming like naive artifacts from a dead self, the memory of that slap a ghost that haunted every classroom, every interaction, and the survival began not with a bang, but with a slow, grinding desperation. Her scholarship covered only tuition, so she took a job as a nighttime cleaner in a downtown office building, pushing a vacuum cleaner past gleaming desks of people whose lives seemed impossibly sordid, her hands smelling of industrial solvent, her soul aching with a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical illness. She would call home sometimes, on birthdays, on Thanksgiving, her foolish heart hoping for an apology, only to hear her father's brusque, "If you're calling for money, don't." Or her mother's whispered, "Lily, please, it's not a good time. Your father's watching the game with Jason. And the click of the phone was the sound of a door slamming shut forever. The silent tears she cried into her thin pillow were for the girl who believed a father's love was unconditional, and the years that followed were a masterclass in quiet resilience. She graduated with honors, but the degree felt hollow in a job market that yawned. She moved to Washington, D.C., drawn by the monuments to power, and there her real education began in a cramped, roach-infested studio in Arlington, Virginia, surviving on a series of soul-crushing internships and then a low-paying researcher job for a cantankerous senator from a small state. Her days a blur of fetching coffee, sorting mail, and writing briefs that others took credit for. Her colleagues often the well-connected children of the powerful, who looked through her as if she were glass. The hunger was not just for food, though there were weeks where dinner was a packet of ramen, but for recognition, for a sign that she was more than the slapped girl from Ohio. The self-doubt was a constant, knowing companion, whispering that her father was right, that she lacked the spine, the grit for anything substantial, that she was destined to be a footnote in other people's stories. But in the deepest core of her being, that vow on the highway had taken root, growing not as a weed of bitterness, but as an oak of resolve. She would wear a uniform, but it would be one of her own choosing, built on her own terms, and so her silent campaign began. Every ignored call, every memory of that stinging cheek, every condescending glance from a staffer born with a silver spoon became fuel for a furnace only she could see. She used her meager salary to enroll in night classes at Georgetown, studying national security and strategic intelligence. Her social life was the library. Her dates were with textbooks. Her discipline was absolute. She saved every penny, dressed in thrift, store blazers, and watched, learned, absorbed the culture of power in the capital. She saw that real influence often wore a suit, not camouflage, but she also saw the profound respect accorded to those who had served in uniform, and a new, clearer path emerged. She would not enlist as a private, she would use her education, her intellect, to become an officer, to lead, and so, while working full-time, she began the Herculean task of applying for a commission in the United States Navy. The physical training she did at 5 a.m. in the gym-based gym at Quantico, borrowing a friend's pass, pushing her body to run faster, to lift more, to prove to herself that she had the physical grit her father denied her. The application process was a gauntlet of boards, interviews, medical exams, and agonizing waits, each step a mountain scaled in the dark. And when the letter finally arrived, bearing the seal of the Department of the Navy, she opened it alone in her studio, and the word, SLE for officer candidate school burned itself into her heart, and she wept, not just for the achievement, but for the little girl who had been told she was nothing, now becoming something formidable. OCS in Newport, Rhode Island was a tempest designed to break and rebuild, and she embraced it. The screaming instructors, the relentless physical trials, the mental bombardment. It was nothing compared to the silent violence of her father's dismissal. She thrived in the structure, found a strange solace in the demanded uniformity, because within it, her merit was the only currency that mattered. She graduated, not as the top of her class, but as a solid, respected officer. Ensign Lily Walker, and she chose the path of an intelligence officer, her sharp mind and research skills finding a perfect, crucial home in the silent world of signals and analysis. Her career became a slow, steady ascent up a ladder of duty and classified briefings. She volunteered for sea duty, spending months on a destroyer in the vast, lonely Pacific, proving her mettle not with bravado, but with relentless competence. She earned her surface warfare qualification, a proud pin she wore on her uniform. She took deployments to challenging posts, From Bahrain to Guam, each move a further step away from Ohio. Each promotion to lieutenant junior grade, then full lieutenant, then lieutenant commander, a silent rebuttal to a father's curse. She sacrificed personal life, romance, the simple comforts of stability, dedicating herself to the Navy and to her own transformation. She used her GI Bill to earn a master's degree in strategic studies, her influence growing in the windowless, secure spaces where the nation's safety was plotted. And through it all, she maintained a distant, silent watch on her family, through the occasional social media post of her brother, now a army captain, still the golden child, or her mother's curated Facebook page showing happy family gatherings, from which she was eternally absent. Her father, she heard through a cousin, had retired, his once rigid pride now tinged with a quiet, unspoken frustration, as if the world he understood had shifted. And he didn't know why, and Lily waited, not with anticipation for a confrontation, but with the calm certainty of a tide that knows it will eventually meet the shore. And the moment arrived not with drama, but with the simple, inevitable machinery of military tradition. After a distinguished career, marked by a commendation for her work during a tense crisis in the South China Sea, Lieutenant Commander Lily Walker was selected for a highly visible, ceremonial role. She was to be the commanding officer of the Color Guard for the prestigious Veterans Day parade in New York City, a nationally televised event, an honor bestowed on an officer of exemplary record and bearing. And as she stood in her immaculate service, dress blues in a hotel room overlooking Fifth Avenue, the rows of ribbons on her chest, the gold of her lieutenant commander stripes catching the light, the weight of her sword at her hip, she looked at her reflection and saw not the slapped girl, but a leader, an American naval officer. And she felt a peace that was deeper than any triumph. Downstairs, amidst the crowds and the waving flags, her family stood, not because she had invited them, but because her brother Jason, now also a major, had heard through the grapevine of her role, and, driven by a complex mix of guilt and familial duty, had insisted they attend, telling their father it was a matter of respect for the service. And so they were there, Richard and Eleanor Walker, older, grayer, standing in the cold November air, surrounded by the patriotic fervor, waiting for the parade to start. And then the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the presentation of colors, led by the United States Navy Color Guard, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Lily Walker." And the band struck up, "Anchors Away," and she appeared, marching at the head of her sharp, perfect unit, her eyes fixed forward, her posture a song of discipline and authority, her sword held at a precise angle, the American flag and the Navy flag snapping in the wind behind her. And as she passed the reviewing stand, she executed a flawless salute, her gaze sweeping the crowd. And for a fraction of a second, it locked with the stunned, pale face of her father, who stood rigid, his own veteran's cap in his hand. And in that instant, time dissolved, the living room in Ohio superimposed on the grandeur of Fifth Avenue, the sting on her cheek replaced by the weight of the sword in her hand, the shame replaced by a serene, unassailable power. And she saw it happen, saw the understanding slam into him with the force of a physical blow, his eyes widening, taking in the uniform he said she'd never wear, the rank he could not ignore, the profound, public respect she commanded, and his body, trained by decades of his own service, reacted before his mind could process. His right hand came up in a crisp, automatic salute. A soldier's instinct to honor the rank, the uniform, the office, but as his hand touched his brow, his face crumbled, the rigid mask of a lifetime shattering into a map of regret and awe. And tears, unbidden and shocking, streamed down his weathered cheeks, his salute now not just one of duty, but of a heartbreaking, belated recognition, and Eleanor beside him was openly weeping, clutching Jason's arm, and Lily, holding her salute for the precise required 3 seconds, allowed the faintest, most serene nod, a nod that contained no anger, no, "I told you so," but a simple, profound acknowledgement of the vast, silent journey between that slap and this salute. And then she marched on, leading her colors down the canyon of cheering Americans, her heart full not of vengeance, but of a quiet, complete closure. The little girl finally, fully healed by the woman she had willed herself to become. Her revenge was the life she built, the respect she earned, the uniform she wore with a dignity that required no explanation. And as the band's music faded behind her, she knew the greatest strength is not in the loud retort, but in the silent, steadfast commitment to become, against all odds, the person you were always meant to be, proving that self-respect, patiently forged in the fires of neglect, becomes an armor no hand can ever touch, and a light no darkness can ever extinguish.